You've tuned into Unpause Your Life with Dr. Cali Estes. Your access to success strategies and more to help you move onward and upward with your life. Listen in each week as she interviews others who have really taken their essence to the next level and truly unpaused their life. Now here's your host, Dr. Cali Estes.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. This is Dr. Cali Estes, and I am founder of the Addictions Academy, the Addictions Coach, and Rehab Rescue. Welcome to Unpause Your Life. This is a great podcast where we showcase people who have done something extraordinary with their life. I welcome you, and I hope you enjoy all of our guests.
On my way, found a reason to wake up another day.
Before we get started, let's hear this short message from one of my supporters.
All the things that you won't do.
Did you know 81% of Americans would like to become a published author? Chances are you might be one of them. What's stopping you? Writing and publishing a book takes a lot of work and is expensive, right? Well, not anymore. For your next book project, or even your first, team up with Hassle-Free Books. They make it so easy to become an author. They remove all of the fuss and struggle and make it smooth and simple. And it's far more affordable than you could ever imagine. Go to hasslefreebooks.com and use promo code UNPAUSE to receive a 10% discount off of any book project. Get started right away and become a published author in as little as 45 days. For your free 1-hour book formula guide, which will show you just how painless it can be to become an author, head to hasslefreebooks.com today.
All right. Thanks again for joining me. Let's get started with today's show.
Took a walk down the dark road where they said that I shouldn't go. I knew the dangers of flying.
Thank you for listening to Unpause Your Life with Dr. Cali Estes. My guest today is Dr. Michael Fenster, and he is a board-certified interventional cardiologist, author, and professional chef. He currently holds faculty cross appointments at the University of Montana, College of Health Professions and Biomedical Sciences, as well as the Missoula College Culinary Arts Program of the Department of Business Technology. That's a mouthful, Dr. Mike. In addition to his clinical practice, he hosts a weekly national radio show, Code Delicious, and his Food as Therapy, it's called FAT Initiative, recognizes the importance of the food experience in our lives, as well as the impact of the quality of the congestibles we ingest, as only a physician and chef could. Dr. Mike has taught and explored the relationship between food and health through international workshops, seminars, lectures, and cooking demonstrations. He has appeared on CBS The Doctors, Fox News, Fox Business News, and has had articles featured in The Atlantic. Oh, goodness, it's a mouthful. A whole bunch of places. So welcome, Dr. Mike.
Thanks, Callie. So good to be here.
Good to have you. So I guess you're going to tell our listeners that Pop-Tarts are not a breakfast food?
That is absolutely correct. And they can actually find out a lot more, too. I wanted to let you all know that my latest book will be coming out June 12th from Postal Publishers called Food Shaman, The Art of Quantum Food. And if folks head over to the website or their favorite book ordering site, Amazon or whatever, they can pre-order it now.
Awesome. We'll put that link up as well. So when the podcast goes live, we'll have that up there and they can click on it and purchase.
Oh, thank you.
All right. So first of all, tell me how you got into this, because this is an interesting combination. You've got the doctorate in the background, and then you've got a chef, which are...
Well, Callie, like there's like new school, that people are really hip and cutting edge. And then there's kind of folks that, kind of follow the wave. And then there's people that are just like really old school. And so I'm actually like ancient school, so ancient that the old is new again, because when we look at the history of food and cookbooks and medicine, what we actually find is that some of the very first cookbooks were written by physicians because dietetics was such an important form of therapy. And it really has been throughout the ages, throughout the cultures, throughout the world, really only until maybe the last 150 years when we really moved with the Industrial Revolution, changing our food pathways, and kind of into the technology-driven basis of medicine where we are today.
Interesting. So let me just ask this. So is there a root cause of all these problems we're having? Is it tied together? Is there synergy? Are they really as different as we hear on the news, for example?
Well, that's a great question, and forgive the pun because I'll be guilty of that. But you really, for a cardiologist too, cut to the heart of the matter here. And when we look at the diseases of the past, what we used to deal with was really, actually, a lot of that was solved not even by what we would call medicine, but by engineering. It had to do with sanitation, those sorts of things. And then really, we ended up having a period in history where we kind of, and in third world countries still do, though not to the extent that we did in the past, with diseases of deficiency. So we can think, sailors go on a long voyage, they don't get vitamin C, fresh fruit, they get scurvy, those sorts of things. But with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, and particularly really post-World War II, so really we're talking about the last 75 years, that complex of what we deal with in medicine, the challenges we face, has really, really changed. And we don't suffer from not getting enough to eat. What we really suffer from is having too many choices, and too many of those being bad choices in terms of the quality of the food. And so what we deal with today is heart disease, obesity, diabetes, cancers, inflammatory bowel diseases, neurodegenerative diseases. And on the surface, because of the way Western medicine is structured, to look at each of these in sort of different silos, they seem very unrelated. And I can tell you, having gone to medical school decades ago, dating myself here, but, when I was studying, cardiology and heart attacks were not related to inflammation of the bowel. They weren't related to things that happen in the brain and whatnot. And yet, really over the last 10 years, and I'd say particularly the last only 5 years, with all the information that we have learned on the gut microbiome, we are finding that there's a common root cause to these, which is a chronic, continuous low-level inflammation. And it relates heart disease, cardiovascular disease, my area of specialty within Western medicine. But just a report a few days ago, again, confirmed that, for example, people that suffer from inflammatory bowel disease, inflammation of the gut lining, leaky gut, are at a significantly increased risk of developing heart attacks. And again, we see that inflammatory leak. We see it in neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. Again, another recent study confirmed people with arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, other forms, psoriatic arthritis, for example, again, those associated with inflammation, guess what? You have an increased risk of heart attack, which also puts you at increased risk of diabetes, obesity, etc. So we're finding this common cause now is kind of bringing everything back together. And really, I've got to go ancient school again and quote Hippocrates. He said, all disease starts in the gut. And he figured that out 2,500 years ago. We're just catching up.
Oh my God. So let me ask this. So inflammation, it sounds like the root cause of all these awful things. Now, first of all, for our listeners, I'm going to pose the question that if you could fix the inflammation, therefore you wouldn't get sick, would you fix the inflammation? So everyone would say, yes, of course I would do that. But let me ask you, Dr. Mike, what do you have to do to fix the inflammation? What causes it?
Well, that's a great point, because I think the first reflex for folks out there is what you said, which is, then I don't want inflammation. But inflammation is important. So the way to think of it is that we're kind of a seesaw, and we want to have that seesaw perfectly balanced between a bit of inflammation and inflammatory response on one side, and then the opposite of that inflammation, that quiescent state on the other side. And when that teeter-totter, that seesaw is perfectly balanced, that's what we call homeostasis. That means we are in balance. And we hear about that so much, in other things we talk about, balance in our lives and balance in our emotion. Well, we need it in our physical body too, because inflammation is really, really important. And anyone who's ever cut themselves or maybe sprained an ankle, for example, well, it's inflammation that heals us. It prevents us from getting sick from bacteria. Inflammation monitors those cancer cells. And that's called acute inflammation. And some people, and rightly so, would suggest that we can see that manifest in the fight or flight response. But where this becomes a problem is when we have stressors in our body, and those stressors can come from the diet, foods we eat, they can come from our emotion, they can come from our lifestyle, they can come from all sorts of areas. But when we're chronically stressed, what happens is we're sort of burning the candle at both ends, or we're leaving that light bulb on, low all the time. And what happens is over time, it sort of burns itself out. And in the action of doing that, it causes all these chronic changes to our bodies that set us up for these other disease states. So we don't want to just get rid of inflammation. What we want to do is we want to turn off that chronic, continuous, low-level inflammation, yet still be able to respond. If we get a bacterial infection or there's a cancer cell, we want our immune system working right. It's sort of like just keeping your lights on. You want to be able to turn your light switch on and have the light go on, and then you turn it off when you don't use it. But if you leave it on all the time, it burns out, and then it's not around, when you need some illumination. And so those are the things we want to do. We want to get really back into balance.
Okay, so let's start with this. What is out of balance? And then tell me, how do we get back there? So how do we know we're out of balance? Because I think a lot of us are on autopilot. We get up, we go through the Burger King drive-thru, we have the cup of coffee with 10 packs of sugar, we go to work, we don't think about it.
Yeah, and we can become adapted to it's insidious. We can become adapted to being in this state of chronic low-level inflammation and not even really realize it until we kind of correct ourselves from that. And there are some ways to measure that. Certainly people could tell you, God, I feel so stressed. My blood pressure's up. I have headaches. I don't feel good. My joints ache. All these are sort of subtle signs our body is trying to tell us that these things are going on. We can measure markers in the blood as well. For example, we can measure something we call high sensitivity C-reactive protein, and that gives us a general idea of the inflammatory state of the body. And indeed, we can see that these sorts of things are elevated. So there are ways to do it, but I would say, this crazy, hectic, fast-paced, 24/7 between our cell phones and the social media and the news cycles, we're all stressed. So I think absolutely everyone, unless you are like a Zen master, we're all stressed to some degree. So we can all benefit from some of these things that will improve the quality of our lives. And that includes reducing our susceptibility to these diseases we've talked about, which we often refer to as the disabilities and diseases of modern civilization.
Okay, so let's start with some preventative or some measures that people can take now. And I'll give you an example. So I used to wake up in the morning and always felt achy and tired and cranky, and I gave up sugar and white flour, cut it completely out. And I wake up and I feel fantastic. So my body said sugar is no good for you.
I think you are a representative and a poster child for my message, because you are exactly right. So here's some free medical advice for everyone. In general, stay away from a lot of white powders. Stop ingesting them. That is generally good sound medical advice. And you hit really right on one of the key foundations and something that I'm very passionate about as a chef, which is the food, the modern Western diet. And the modern Western diet, a diet that is built on convenience, among other things, really loads us up with sugar, salt, and fats. And a lot of those refined white flours, for example, our body takes those and converts those rapidly into sugars, something people may have heard of called a glycemic index. And so the modern Western diet, we find when we look at that compared to diets in the past, when we look compared to diets around the globe that don't eat like we do in the United States, we don't find these disabilities and diseases of civilization to the extent that we do here. And I'll give you one example. This was recently published, if we look at any group in the United States, we find there's about a 60% rate of coronary blockages to some degree in people over 50. And we say, well, that's just a consequence of getting older. But then this is the lowest recorded group so far in the history of the world, was a hunter-gatherer group called the Tismani out of South America. And so they hunt, or they gather, they just don't eat the processed foods, but they have a very varied diet. The percentage of coronary disease in folks of that tribe over 50 years old was 3%. That's just a 3, not 30,
Wow.
3. So a fraction
Yeah.
of what we see in the U.S.
So let me ask you this question, because I have friends that are trainers and chefs and such, and I've got one that's doing this crazy, I don't know what it's called. She's putting butter in her coffee and eating bacon fat and swearing by this diet. And I said to her, that's going to clog up your heart. What do you think about things like that? These fad diets that people get on and start using different things?
Well, I think, fads of any way, shape, or form are sort of bad. But believe it or not, she is on the right track in the sense that fats don't make us fat and they don't give us disease. And I cover that sort of extensively in my new book, and in my other book that's available now, Fallacy of the Calorie. We talk about that fairly extensively as well. So that's just, the tip of the iceberg of these food myths. Or should I say food pyramid? I guess that's a better analogy, that have been out there for the last 50 years. We've had the ship going in the wrong direction. But what we have to understand is that it comes down not to categories like fats or even categories like butter or red meat, but it comes down to quality, not categories. So there's a big difference between eating some processed bacon that's industrially produced from an animal that was raised under very stressful circumstances, which are what we call concentrated animal feeding organizations, the bulk of how animal products are produced in this country, and fed a diet of GMO foods, versus a heritage breed animal that was pastured, had a very good life eating what that animal eats naturally. And when we look at how those foods are raised, what we're finding is that it makes a huge difference. And again, I'll give you a quick example. When we look at, in general, how lamb, with few exceptions, in Montana, for example, it's very often pasture raised. But the bulk of the industrial lamb you go in to buy a lamb chop is, again, these kind of animal organizations, CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding organizations, a certain type of feed, GMO feed, et cetera, et cetera. They have really almost no of the valuable anti-inflammatory omega-3 fats. But when we look to that same species of lamb raised in Australia or New Zealand, where they're allowed to wander the hills and be happy and frolic and, eat whatever, lambs graze on when they're on the hills, we find that they have very, very high levels of these very powerful omega-3 anti-inflammatory fats. And so it's the same product, if you will, but it's just a matter of how it was raised. And we're finding that's very, very critical. And the health of what we eat affects us. It shouldn't be a surprise, but we don't pay attention to it here.
Yeah, I've noticed that. A lot of people will say, well, I'm not eating potato chips. I'm eating tons of fruits and vegetables and meat. And then I'll say, well, are you eating organic product? Or are you, just grabbing the first thing off the shelf in the grocery store? And then you find out they're doing exactly that. They're grabbing the cheaper chicken and the cheaper beef, and they're getting the GMOs and they're getting all that stuff, and they're still getting sick, correct?
Well, absolutely. And what I talk about, and where, believe it or not, this really comes from, I wish as, an academic kind of medical professional, I could say, oh, well, medicine and, cardiologists and have led the way and, all into this great insight. But gosh darn it, the credit for this really goes to chefs, because I think, Food Network came out maybe 15 years ago. So it was about that time you had a bunch of, chefs saying, I'm not ordering from these industrial places. I don't like that food. It's not real food. It doesn't taste good. I'm going to source organic locally and get stuff that has flavor. I'm buying heirloom things. Now I'm going to charge my customers more. We'll see if it works. And this whole farm to table, which we think of as a new movement, but really it's how people have eaten throughout the history of mankind, except for the last maybe 50 or 75 years. They brought this to the forefront, and people were willing to pay for food that tastes good. And what we see is over the last decade or so, people that follow this pathway tend to be healthier than people that don't. And it really, really does make a difference. So as you said, just picking those things up, about 60 to 75% of all food in a mega market supermarket contains GMOs in one form or another. That's frightening. That means you have to work. That means you have to source your food.
That's interesting. You said that. I just had this conversation with my mother the other day, who's starting finally to get on the bandwagon. And I was at Whole Foods and she says, "What are you doing at Whole Foods? It's twice the price." And I said, "Well, I'd rather pay twice the price now and get the good food than end up at the doctor paying triple the price, 2 years from now because I'm eating so poorly." So I finally got her on the bandwagon of trying, some other things. And her first instinct was, well, it doesn't taste the same. Well, and I said, well, a banana isn't supposed to taste like the bag of sugar that you're used to eating. A banana is sweet. You gotta get used to the fruit. So it's been about a year and a half now, 2 years. She's been doing that where she's off the sugar, but everything was sugar, cakes, pastries, candies. So she would do the fruit and say it doesn't taste right. And I think as a society, we've lost our palate for things because it's so deadened with all the salts and all the sugars and all the GMOs that when you have a natural piece of fruit, you go, "Ooh, it doesn't taste right."
You're exactly right. And not only that, a great book, and a very, very detailed. So it's a rather dense tome to get through, even for somebody interested in it like me. But fascinating information was written by David Kessler called "The End of Overeating in America" some years ago. And Dr. Kessler was the previous head of the FDA and always struggled with his weight. And what he did was he actually went and talked to the people that make our food. And what you find is that basically the modern Western diet layers sugar, salt, and fat tuned to specific foods, something called our blissful points, specifically to make us come back and buy that product. And as these producers of food have said, and as they told Dr. Kessler, our job isn't nutrition. We're not here for your health. We are here so that you come by and buy my company's brand of potato chips or my company's, cooked cakes or cookies. And so it's manipulating what we were built to appreciate 100,000, maybe 1,000,000 years ago in terms of fat. Well, that's important. We respond positively to that. Sugar, it's quick energy. And if you and I are out running saber-toothed tigers and I grabbed an apple, I might be a little faster than you, and that could prove advantageous as well. And salt is such a powerful driver that many neurologists and folks who do neurological research contend that it's our craving for salt that is really the basis for every addictive behavior in mankind. It's so ingrained in us. So they combine those powerful biological hardwired imperatives into food. So subconsciously you become addicted to these things, which, as you said, which is why folks find they're going through the drive-through ordering something and they're like, gosh, last thing I knew, I remember going out the door, grabbing a coffee. I don't even remember, pulling into the line here. And here I am, picking up my bag of goodies and off for the day.
That's interesting you said that because my husband and I have a debate. In the house, we have all organic, all healthy food. Nothing comes in here that you drive through from. And he'll sneak out and he'll go to lunch and he'll go to McDonald's or Wendy's or Burger King. And then I'll get in his car and I'll see all the wrappers in the back seat that he's trying to hide. So he says, but it just tastes so good. And I said, it's so bad. So I made him watch the pink slime video on McDonald's. And he's like, yeah, I don't buy it. And I said, that's what you're eating, And I said, and that's why it tastes good. Look at all the crap they put in there. So even being with me, who's super healthy, super into healthy food, he still has that pull for it. Why is that? Is it that the chemicals get so ingrained in your system, or what happens?
It's addiction, because remember, you talked about sugar that, we chatted on. Sugar uses the same neurological pathways as heroin. Okay. Yeah. And there's an opioid, a problem, and heroin and so on and so forth. It's using the same pathways. It's just using a different white powder, as we talked about at the beginning. So this is really forming an addiction. And you've got to break that addiction. In my line of work, what I draw a parallel to is a big tobacco. Nobody disagrees that when you start smoking cigarettes, you get an addiction to cigarettes. And, these folks, it isn't incredibly hard to break that habit. But like you're talking about with the food, when people finally get away from it and they can get some distance, I would have, and very often still have, folks come into the office and they say, Doc, I was smoking 2 packs, 3 packs a day. And now that I haven't smoked in 2 months, I can't even be around somebody who smells like a cigarette. What was I thinking?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with food. Once you break that addiction, what you'll find is not only do you not crave that, but because, actually my very first job in the food industry was in fast food in college. And as a starving college student, when I did closeout, I was bringing bags of that stuff home for me and my roomies. And so we were, addicted until, all of a sudden I kind of looked at myself in the mirror and said, my gosh, what's going on here? The only difference is, the stuff I've been eating for free when we get it at closeout. Now, that stuff would make me physically sick. But at one point in my life, I'd adapted to totally live on it. Our bodies are remarkable. We will adapt, but make no mistake, if you adapt to that modern Western diet, you will pay a price. Every bill comes due sooner or later. I think one of the keys to breaking that addiction is utilizing the recipe or the formula, and that's originally what prescriptions were. RX actually stood for recipes.
Really?
Is really good, tasty food. So we flavor our food the old-fashioned way with herbs and with spices, and we bring these things, back into our diet, and we reacquire a palate. And Callie, I'm telling you, probably like you, once you do that, you don't even crave those things. You find yourself repulsed by them. You want real food that tastes good, that satisfies, and that makes you feel good. It's like you can feel your body saying, "Hey, thanks. We're enjoying this." And it turns out, lo and behold, a lot of these herbs and spices, they are loaded with natural benefits for us. So it's kind of a plus win-win.
That's another thing that's interesting that you say. I dragged my husband to an organic restaurant and I didn't tell him anything. It was organic and it had all no dairy, no soy. I didn't say a word. And we ordered, it was a chili and it was fantastic. And he was raving. He's like, this is so good. It's got good flavor and it's got spices and it tastes so good. And then for dessert, we had cheesecake, which wasn't cheesecake, of course. It had cashew nuts and non-dairy, non-sugar. And I said, what did you think? And he said, it was really, really good. And I said, you realize you just ate real food. And he looked at me and he goes, what do you mean? I said, dude, food, not junk. And he said, I feel good. I don't feel tired. I don't feel sluggish. I said, yeah, this is how you're supposed to eat.
You were like the helpful trickster,
I do this with my clients. I work with a lot of addicts and they come to me because they got clean and sober off of drugs, but in treatment, they give you candy and they give you cake and they tell you can have all the sugar. So they're coming to me going, now what? Now I've put on 40 pounds and I'm eating sugar instead of doing whatever drug. So we talk about how we're going to get off of that. So it's just fascinating to me. Like the chemical side, the side you see is how it interacts inside the body.
Well, you're not the only one. I mean, I think it was maybe in the late 90s, early 2000s, you could go to the American Heart Association and they would tell you, instead of eating saturated fat, if you feel that urge, suck on, some hard, candy. Mm-hmm. Which was nothing but sugar. And so all they're doing and your clients are doing is sort of trading one addiction for another. And what you're doing when you take somebody there and you awaken that palate and you get them to experience that real food. And then they find that, wow, I ate this meal. It was absolutely delicious. And I feel good. I don't feel bloated. I don't feel like, I've got to go take a nap for 6 months. That sort of feeling. And I have more energy, after doing this for a week. That becomes that positive feedback cycle that we can get people to break this addictive behavior. And, particularly for folks at home, because obviously it's difficult to get this kind of food when you're out on the road, unless you, like you have done, research those places that serve that type of cuisine, really using the herbs and spices, some basic culinary techniques. And, we can get folks back on their way to awakening their palate, feeling good, being better, being healthier. And it's just a positive feedback. And a lot of that too, I'm glad to say, when we look at a lot of the foods you and I are talking about, we're talking about things that are done very sustainably, humanely, it's not only just good for us, but it's good for our communities when we, buy and eat local, good for our regions, good for the earth in general. So, I think that is a very positive thing that also feeds back on itself in the long run.
Absolutely. I'm excited for your book to come out. I'm going to get a couple copies for my clients because I think they all need to hear and understand this, not just from a talk level, but actually see the science behind it.
Yeah, and the fallacy of the calories out, that's kind of like the very scientific heavy primer. Food Shaman, which is coming out, builds on that foundation and looks at some of these, kind of softer edges, which we're finding out is so very important. And, we spent some time talking about, the very mechanics of the food, as the foundation. But what we're also finding out, it's not just what we eat, but how we eat, with whom we eat, how we eat. And so you talked about that dinner with your husband. I can guarantee that if you gave him that same food, while he was on the freeway, stuck in a traffic jam, trying to eat and drive and do business and talk, it wouldn't have been near as good a food experience. And so that's something I think in the larger scope, which we have to incorporate into our healthful approach, our wellness, is understanding food, outside of a test tube. It's not about RDAs or percent fat, is it? It's about food and how food relates to us, how we relate to others through food. And that's what I call the food experience. And that can be powerfully healing, and it can be, as we see with the modern Western diet, when I'm on the go all the time, I see somebody in the airport, and their Cinnabon is a carry-on because it's so gosh darn big, it fits in the overhead compartment, and they're mindlessly just eating, not even aware of what's going on, probably not even actually hungry, just as a reflex, out of boredom, etc. So, I think understanding the food experience, and in terms of relational, how it relates to us, relates to our body, but more importantly, how we relate to others through food and them to us.
Very interesting. I think we've really lost that connection. I mean, it used to be back in the 40s and 50s, we had sit-down meals. We had sit-down dinners, sit-down breakfasts. And now everything is how quickly we can get the kids fed and off to school. So it ends up being, what's the fastest, easiest modality? You're handing them their packable peanut butter and jelly sandwich from the freezer that you bought. You're running them out the door to the next event. And we don't do what we used to do anymore.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, we've been sold and we bought into, a convenience culture. And, again, I talk about, and we've talked about, just cooking and even using some simple herbs and powerful herbs, thyme and in Mediterranean cuisine, for example, and ginger in Asian cuisine and turmeric in Middle Eastern and Indian cuisine, to utilize those and get some of the benefits of those real foods. We have to stop and cook with them, or at least you have to make the effort to seek them out. And that, does take some effort and does take that time. But that is that, we will get the reward from that. I mean, we've got to get past sacrificing everything on the altar of convenience. And that's what we've done. We've given away control of our diet because people have given us convenience in return. And I think diet is just something, as a chef, I've just got to tell you, I may be biased, but man, that's just way too personal. I'm all about the food experiences and having, great meals with friends and family. And I think really a lot of listeners would say, hey, if I asked you to give me 5 of your top experiences in your life, you'd find food involved in a couple of them. It was at a reception. It was a dinner. It was a romantic interlude, whatever it is. Food's the history of us. And from both a cultural society perspective, humankind, food defines cultures. We talk about Italian food, Chinese food, Mexican food, ethnicities, but also on a personal level. I mean, all we are is the memories we have, and those memories are really relationships, interactions.
That's true. I mean, I'm Italian, so Christmas wasn't one course. Christmas was 7 courses of food. And it's like, and laughter, and it wasn't an hour meal. It was a 5-hour meal. It was an event. So I totally agree with you.
And I think if we can convince people to do it, not because it's good for them health-wise, but simply because it tastes great, as you did with your husband. Look, don't listen to anything your doctor's going to tell you. Don't worry about it. When I try to get people, when I talk to them, when I'm doing a cooking demo, it's not about the cardiologist side. It's about the chef side. It's about, let's come in, let's have some fun, let's have a great food experience. And that's, I kind of coined the term for what I do as being a food shaman, because I'm kind of like between these worlds of test tubes and, frying pans.
Mm-hmm.
And, shamans were always about bringing things back to, the community and the individuals that needed them, bringing that healing information back, bringing that healing experience back for people to then engage. And that's what we really need to do. And when they follow that, because it tastes great, what they're going to find is that the consequence of kind of returning to our natural roots, to becoming more authentic in their lives, at least with their diets, is that they're going to be suffering less from what we started the show about, which is these disabilities and diseases of modern civilization that have at their root this chronic, continuous, low-level inflammation.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Mike, it was a pleasure to have you on. We are just about out of time. So what takeaways could you leave our listeners with if they're listening today and want to be a little bit more healthy? What would you recommend?
Well, I'm going to give 5 quick tips, if you can bear with me. So I'm going to give a couple of herbs that I think are great and represent different types of, food flavors. What do I call flavor profiles? So we talked about ginger, which is great for you, anti-inflammatory. Get that into your diet. That comes, from the Asian influence. We have thyme, which we see in Mediterranean and European cooking, the basis of a lot of restaurants, a lot of modern American cuisine. Again, very powerful anti-inflammatories, and who can't use with a little more time. We've got turmeric, which again comes from India and the Middle East region. This is one of the hottest anti-inflammatories out there, but so good in all our food. Every time you squirt some mustard, you're probably having a little turmeric. Boswellia, or frankincense, which most people know as an incense type, has actually been used in Indian healing for about 4,000 years, and folks can get that now in a oral form. And so I'm going to leave them with one capsule that I use for my joint issues, which is Easy Flex by a company called 1md.org, who I do some consulting work with, and it combines several of these powerful anti-inflammatories, and that's a great way to kind of get kick-started to help break this cycle of chronic inflammation that we're subject to, and change those diets, and most of all, get out there and have some real good, authentic food. Make it delicious.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mike, for coming on. And we're going to put links up to your book and your bio and ways for people to reach you. Do you want to give us your Twitter or your website or anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. It's very quick. It's at Chef Dr. Mike, chefdrmike.com. That's Twitter and Facebook. And come on over to the website, which is www.chefdrmike.com. And if they subscribe to my newsletter, I put out some monographs on some of these things. Just this week, we put one out on frankincense, on Boswellia. Those are all free. So we'd love to have you come on over and drop some comments and give us your thoughts. And Cali, thank you so much. It's been wonderful chatting with you.
Thanks for coming on, Dr. Mike. Everyone, Dr. Mike Fenster, you can find all of his information up on the podcast site, and absolutely check his book out and start applying some of these things today so you don't end up in his office on the other end. Thank you for coming on. This is Unpause Your Life.
Thanks, Cali. Appreciate it.
Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. I really hope you enjoyed the show today. Head on over to iTunes and Apple Podcasts and leave a comment or review of what you think. Or contact us at 1-800-706-0318. If you want to be on our show, feel free to email or call. And if you have a topic, feel free to email or call as well.
Thanks for listening to Unpause Your Life. For show notes and more, head on over to unpauseyourlife.com.
Big shout out to recoveryinnovators.com for help producing this show. Thank you, guys.
Took a walk down the long road where they said that I shouldn't go. On my way found a reason to wake up another day. But they needed to show you all the things that you won't do. Find faith or religion, but nothing to show for it. No need to escape, in love with my pain. I may be awake, but I'm alive, still alive, and I won't be bound by your mistake. No, I won't be your enemy, trapped at the gate. Bring me to life, put me to death. Just give me something that's just not so hard to believe. To believe. To believe. I took a walk down the dark road where they said that I shouldn't go. I knew the dangers of flying. Now I'm so far from silent ground. But they needed to show you all the things that you won't do. Find faith or religion, but nothing to show for it. No need to escape, in love with my pain. I may be awake, but I'm alive, still alive, and I won't be bound by your mistake. No, I won't be your enemy, trapped at the gate. Bring me to life, put me to death. Just give me something that's just not so hard to believe. To believe. To believe. You lie. You lie. You lie. You lie. You lie. You lie. No need to escape, with my pain. I may be awake, but I'm alive, still alive, and I won't be bound by your mistake. No, I won't be your enemy, trapped at the gate. Bring me to life, put me to death. Just give me something that's just not so hard to believe. To believe. To believe.